Hey guys, welcome to today's video. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. And just a quick disclaimer or whatever, if you hear loads of noises in the background, the kittens are playing, so just ignore the noises in the background. But let's get straight into the video. Welcome to today's video. Today's video is what I have read recently. So I hope you enjoy this video and let's get straight into it. One of the first books that I have read recently is The Chalk Man by C.J. Tudor, and I rated this a 5-star, and I'll read the blurb quickly. It says, "None of us agreed on the exact beginning. Was it when we started drawing chalk figures or when they started to appear on their own? Was it the terrible accident or when they found the first body?" And as I said, I rated this a 5-star. And I'll try to explain the story without spoiling anything. It follows these group of boys, and there's this weird thing that happened when they were younger. Well, there was loads of little things that happened, weird things were happening. First there was this big explosion at a fairground. First this dog died, and then as you do when you grow older, that friendship group started just to grow apart, if that makes sense. And then there's this guy in this story who was one of the boys in this friendship group. He ends up getting this letter and meets up with one of his old friends from his childhood. And then this friend goes missing, and then he receives this letter. So he gets hold of the other people that was in this friendship group to find out if they received this letter. As the story develops, you find more and more about, links that went on in their childhood. And and when there's little, whenever these bad things happened, there would be these chalk figures, chalk men. And as the story develops, you hear more and more about who, little secrets to do with each character. And I know it's kind of a bit of a bad explanation, but it's hard to explain what's happened without spoiling it, and I don't want to be spoiling it, because this is a good book and I really do recommend it. But there is quite a few trigger warnings. There's rape, there's sexual assault, there's murder, obviously, and the murder's quite graphic, and some of the stuff in here is quite graphic, but it's a really bloody good book. I rated it 5-star. And as the story develops, you start questioning every character throughout the story, maybe it's him, and it's you start having doubts about every character, and you can't trust a single character in this book. And it's so bloody creepy. And as you do when you read a book, you make assumptions, but trust me, if you read this book, every single one of your assumptions will be wrong. But yeah, I really did enjoy The Chalk Man by C.J. Tudor. And if you hear a noise outside, it's some sort of building people. But anyway, I really want to read more by C.J. Tudor. Now let's move on to the next book. The next book which I've read recently is Dear Justice by Nick Stone. And I did really enjoy the first Nick Stone, but with this one I only rated it 3 stars. because I did really enjoy this book. I'll start with the pros and the cons, but I really enjoyed how Justice, who was the main character in the first one, was so prominent in this story and so prominent in the telling of this story. The thing that I didn't like about this book is there were some things throughout the story that was mentioned, then you'd only hear about it once or twice again, whereas I wanted to know more. Like, for example, I can't remember his name, Kwan or Han, his sister ends up quite poorly. I think she might have cancer or something like that. But you hear about it once or twice and you don't hear about it again. And I was just like, oh, okay. And when I started reading this, I was quite baffled because obviously this book's about Kwan/Han. And I was quite confused about the character at the start because in the first book, he's only mentioned once or twice, whereas I would have preferred like him having a strong link to the first book, if that makes sense. Whereas I didn't know much about his character before this book. So yeah, I only rated it a 3-star. And on the back it says, Justice McAllister and Vernal Laquan Banks grew up a block apart in Atlanta neighbourhood of Winewood Heights. Justice and Kwan go way back, but they've taken different paths. While Justice went to a good school, Kwan got caught up in a world of crime and fear. Now Justice studies law at Yale University and Kwan sits behind bars at the Regional Youth Detention Centre charged with murder. A dead cop, a gun with Kwan's fingerprints all over it. But does that make Kwan a killer? As the two boys' paths begin to merge again, the answer becomes increasingly unclear. So this is the next book which I've read recently. Moving on to the next book. The next book is quite a, let's just say, quite a book. It's The End of Everything by Megan Abbott. And I only rated this book, well, on Goodreads I said 2/3, but I think thinking about it now, I'd say a 2. And before I start talking about this book, I'd read the back. Lizzie and Evie are inseparable. They walk home from school together, they sleep over at each other's houses, even flirt with boys together and tell each other everything. Or at least that's what Lizzie thinks, until Evie goes missing and Lizzie suddenly realises their friendship wasn't as quite as she thought. And I don't even know where to start with this book. This book was very confusing. And I'm not sure whether it was just me or it was the book and the way it was wrote. I did look on Goodreads to see if there was anyone else who thought what I was thinking, if that makes sense, and there was quite a lot actually. And I was quite confused with this book because obviously it's talking about this girl who's gone missing and everyone thinks she's been kidnapped by a neighbour. What I was getting from the book, it was just about a group of 12, 13-year-old girls, possibly 11, having some sort of relationship with older men. And when I say older, I mean like 40, 50-year-olds, if that makes sense, which I thought was quite weird. And it was like, the whole story just seemed to be about young girls having sexual relationships with older men and having sexual attractions to 40, 50-year-olds, which I thought was quite wrong. And it was quite, I read it and thought, what am I reading? It was nothing what I expected it to be, but I just thought it was I thought it was a bit odd to write about that sort of thing in a book. So I ended up rating it a 2. And if the thing keeps moving, the kitten are playing, it keeps on running into it. But anyway, I just didn't like this book. I didn't think it was right to talk about this sort of thing within a book and not have any warnings about it. It could have just been me getting confused, but there was quite a lot of people who also agreed with me. So yeah, I wasn't a fan of this book. Moving on to the next book, which I've read recently, that is The Duff by Cody Keplinger. And I wasn't expecting to enjoy this book as much as I did. And I definitely think I prefer Cody Keplinger's writing in this book compared to That's Not What Happened, because I didn't seem to gel with how it was written in That's Not What Happened. And with this book you can definitely tell it's for the teenager audience, but I did thoroughly enjoy it. I rated it a 4-star, and before I get into the story and stuff, I'd read the back. 17-year-old Bianca Piper may not be the prettiest girl at school, but she has a loyal group of friends, biting wit and a spot-on BS detector. She's also too smart to fall for the charms of man-slut Wesley, but then she casually refers to Bianca as the Duff of her crew, the designated ugly fat friend. The gloves are off. But things aren't so great at home, and Bianca's desperate for a distraction and ends up kissing Wesley. Worse, she likes it, and before she knows it, she's in a secret enemies with benefits relationship with him. Until it goes horribly wrong. It turns out Wesley isn't such a bad listener, and his life is pretty screwed up too. Suddenly, Bianca realises with absolute horror that she's fallen for the guy she thought she hated more than anyone. So yeah. And there was only one thing I didn't agree with in this book, is about the whole fat thing in it. It was a bit, But I found this book very funny. It had me chuckling a lot. And I found that I think pretty much all the characters that was mentioned in this book was very relatable. And I just really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really funny and really sweet, and I loved seeing the relationship develop between Bianca and Wesley. And I did end up watching a film just to compare it, and the film is so crap compared to the book. The film's very cringe-worthy and kind of makes you want to puke because of how cringy it is. And in the film, the person who plays Bianca is nowhere near fat. They could have at least had a curvier girl. And in the film, they don't even sleep together. I think they either only sleep together once or they don't sleep together whatsoever. And I just think in the film the storyline was a bit of a faff, whereas the book, I really enjoyed this storyline and I really enjoyed how it developed. And if Keplinger has done books kind of like this one, I'd definitely read it, but if it's not like That's Not What Happened, I might not. So yeah, that's The Duff by Cody Keplinger. The next book which I've read is This Lie Will Kill You by Chelsea Pitcher, and I rated this book a 4-star, and on the back it says, "You are cordially invited to tell the truth or face the consequences. 1 year ago there was a party. At the party someone died. Until now no one has told the truth about what happened. Tonight the 5 survivors arrive at an isolated mansion expected to compete in a contest with $50,000 prize. Nobody questioned the odd, rather exclusive invitation until it's too late. 5 arrive, but not all can leave. Will the truth set them free, or will the lies destroy them all? And I really enjoyed this book. Again, I didn't expect it to be as good as what I thought. And this book, it has so many twists, literally on every page. And I was definitely fooled by some of the bits in this book. Like, there was this relationship at the beginning and I thought it was the cutest thing in the world. Whereas as the story develops more and more, it was quite a toxic, abusive relationship. And I thought it was quite beautiful how you hear more about some of the characters. Like, for example, there's this girl in it. I can't remember her name. One of the main girls in this. You hear more and more about her character. And I just thought it was quite beautiful. And I thought I think his name might be Shane? No. Anyway, the guy that dies in the book, I thought he was quite a sweet character, and I really enjoyed hearing more and more about him. And this book kind of tells a story about, like, you know, the more you hear about characters, the more bad things they've done, and it literally has you guessing until the last word. And it's just so incredible, this book. The thing that I didn't gel with is that this book is constantly throwing you new information from, like, the first chapter. And at the beginning I found it very confusing, and there would be points in this book that because I was being thrown so much information, I was getting so confused. That's the only bad thing I could say about this book. And there was quite a few trigger warnings as well, but they don't tend to... I'm worried the cat's going to drink my water. Some of the trigger warnings in this book is obviously murder, abuse, toxic relationships, and I can't remember any more, but there probably is more. But yeah, this Lyra Koyu and Chelsea picture is good. I'm definitely going to read more by this author. The next book, which I've read, is a book I was so damn excited to read, and I have such a soft spot for this author, and I cannot wait to read the next one in this trilogy. And that book is It's Not Summer Without You by Jenny Han. And just thinking about this whole trilogy and the first 2 books, because obviously I haven't read the third, but thinking about them makes my heart so warm. And just the characters in this book just makes me feel so warm and fuzzy. And of course, if you haven't guessed, I rated this book a 5-star. And when I had finished the first book, I was worried that one of the characters, the boy's mum, she ends up ill in the first book. I was worried that if she died, I was worried that her character wouldn't be so prominent in this book, if that makes sense. And because she's such a prominent character in the first story, I was worried that her kind of, not her soul, but her existence wasn't going to be as huge in this book, but it is. And it's just so beautiful. And I really love how this book carries on the kind of love triangle between Belly, Conrad and Jeremiah. But if you have read this book, I desperately want Belly and Conrad to be together, because Conrad's the kind of mysterious one who seems troubled, kind of the bad boy, if that makes sense. So I really want them together because Belly seems to kind of ground him sometimes. So yeah, but this book is just talking about how, I'm trying to talk about it without spoiling it, but basically something happens and they might have to get rid of the summer house, and Conrad stays at the summer house to try and so they don't get rid of it, if that makes sense. And it's just talking about how even though Jeremiah and Belly are best of friends, there's still some things that Belly doesn't know about Jeremiah, for example. You know, like relationships and stuff like that. I just thought this book was so beautiful. It's just the way Jenny Han writes is just incredible. And I'm rooting for Jeremiah and Belly to be in the third book. Well, obviously they're going to be together, like as in a relationship, because I won't be happy. This will not disappoint, and it's so light-hearted. Well, it's not light-hearted, but it's such a warm book, even though there is some sad bits. And another thing, there was a point in this book when I wanted to frisbee every single book on my bookshelf at Conrad and Jeremiah's dad. I won't say what happened, but I wanted to. Oh, I wanted to. This recent book that I've read recently is The Hate List by Jennifer Brown, and I was very intimidated by reading this book because of how much of a big boy it is. But the thing I loved about this book is even though it's so big, it doesn't feel like you're reading a big book because it's very fast paced and it's very kind of easy to read, if that makes sense. And I'll quickly read the back, and it says, 5 months ago, Valerie Lefman's boyfriend Nick opened fire on their school cafeteria. Val was shocked of everyone else, but despite her own serious injury, she's implicated in the crime because of the list. The list she and Nick made of people they hated. The list Nick used to pick his targets. Now, after a summer of seclusion, Val is forced to confront her guilt as she returns to school to complete her senior year. Haunted by the memory of the boyfriend she still loves and navigating rocky relationships with her family, her former friends and the girl whose life she saved, Val must come to grips with the tragedy that took place and her role in it in order to make amends and move on with her life. And I rated this book a 5-star. I really enjoyed the way Jennifer Brown wrote this book because as you read the back, you expect it to be, you know, about the school shooting and about how it impacted everyone else. But in this book, it talks about how, obviously it talks about that, but it talks about how Val is dealing with grief of her because her boyfriend shoots himself, and that's like mentioned in the first couple pages. But this book also talks about the fact that Val is dealing with grief of her boyfriend dying, and it also talks about the fact that of course everyone has this bad image of him because he shot all these people, but it also talks about that Val also knew him as a good person, and there was a couple people in this story that talks to him about good things and him being good, if that makes sense. Talks about how even though he was such a bad person and he had done lots of bad things, he was also a good person, and he was also kind. And I thought it was very incredible how Jennifer Brown did this throughout this story. And I haven't quite read a book quite like this. I thought it was so incredible, and I definitely want to read more. And it also talks about how members of Val's family is also dealing with the fact that, depends on the way you look at it, a lot of people blamed the whole thing on Val and said it was just as much Val's fault as it was Nick's fault. And it talks about how Valerie's parents are dealing with it and how whether they blame it on Val or not. And there was a point in this book when I wanted to frisbee not just the books on my bookshelf, but the actual bookshelf at Val's dad's head, because he made me angry. So yeah, but I really enjoyed this book, and I enjoyed how it didn't feel like a chore reading it because of how thick it is, if that makes sense. But yeah, I rated this a 5-star because it definitely deserved a 5-star. Even though these are all the books that I've read, the book that I'm currently reading is Finding Colin Firth by Mia March. And I'm 160 pages in this book, and I'm not sure whether I enjoy it or not. So yeah. So guys, that's all the books I've read recently, and it's also the book I'm currently reading. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and comment down below what book you're currently reading and your favourite book that you've read recently. And also comment down below any yellow emoji. I'll see you in next week's video. Bye! Thank you.